Chosen one, there are moments when the heart grows so quiet that even the people standing closest to it cannot hear what it has been trying to say. Not because the truth is too complicated, but because it has been carried for so long that it begins to sound like ordinary breathing. Your soulmate has been living inside one of those moments, smiling when it seemed easier, speaking when silence would have felt too heavy, and quietly wondering how much longer a hidden ache could remain unseen without becoming part of who they are. If you had looked into their eyes on an ordinary afternoon, you might have noticed nothing unusual. They would have asked how your day had gone. They would have remembered the little things you forgot to mention, laughed at a joke that wasn't especially funny, and reached for the mug you always left near the edge of the table before it could fall. Life has a remarkable way of wrapping extraordinary emotions inside ordinary routines. That is how love often survives. Not with grand speeches. With tiny acts that almost disappear before anyone notices them. The shoes placed neatly by the door after a long day. The blanket gently pulled over someone who fell asleep on the couch. The message typed, erased, typed again, then replaced with something simpler because honesty suddenly felt too frightening. There is a certain kind of pain that never announces itself with tears. It hides behind kindness. It learns patience. It becomes so skilled at protecting others that it forgets how to ask for comfort in return. Your soulmate has been carrying that kind of pain. Not because they wanted to deceive you. Not because their heart loved you any less. But because they believed that if you ever saw the whole truth, you might begin looking at them differently. That belief did not appear overnight. Long before your paths crossed, they had learned how easily people misunderstand quiet struggles. They discovered that explaining every wound often made others uncomfortable. So they became excellent at saying, "I'm fine," with a smile convincing enough to end every conversation before it truly began. The strange thing about hidden burdens is that they do not disappear simply because they are hidden well. They grow. Quietly. Patiently. Like ivy climbing an old wall while everyone admires the flowers in front of it. Perhaps you have known something similar yourself. Perhaps there was a day when someone asked whether everything was all right, and you answered yes because explaining the real answer felt impossible. Not impossible because you lacked words, but because the words seemed too fragile once they left your heart. There is no shame in that. Human hearts often protect themselves before they know they are safe. Morning light slipped through a half-open curtain as your soulmate sat alone with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold. The steam had disappeared several minutes earlier, yet they continued holding the mug as though warmth could somehow return if they waited long enough. Outside, rain rested softly against the window. Not a storm. Just enough to blur the world beyond the glass. They watched tiny drops race one another downward, wondering why something so small could leave such long trails behind. Memories often behave the same way. One thought touches another. One forgotten afternoon awakens an entire season. Without realizing it, their fingers traced the rim of the mug exactly 3 times. It was an old habit. One they had never explained. One they barely noticed anymore. Every time fear returned, their hands remembered before their mind did. Across the room rested a small wooden box tucked onto the highest shelf of a bookcase. Dust gathered around its edges, untouched for years. Inside lay several ordinary things. A faded movie ticket. An old key whose lock no longer existed. A pressed wildflower. And a letter. still unopened. Not because they feared reading it. Because they feared believing it. Some truths change us the moment we allow ourselves to see them. So the envelope remained sealed. Waiting. Almost forgotten. Yet never truly forgotten. The heart has remarkable memory. It remembers what the mind tries to archive. Later that afternoon, when the clouds finally began to part, your soulmate found themselves walking through a neighborhood park where children chased one another across damp grass while older couples occupied weathered benches beneath tall maple trees. Life continued in every direction. Dogs tugged gently against their leashes. A bicycle bell rang twice before disappearing around the corner. Someone nearby practiced a violin, missing more notes than they found. None of it was extraordinary. Yet something about ordinary moments has a way of reminding us that healing rarely arrives with fireworks. It often arrives quietly. Almost shyly. As they reached the pond, they noticed an elderly man feeding small pieces of bread to a gathering of ducks. One slice remained untouched beside him. Without looking up, he smiled. "I always bring one extra," he said. Your soulmate paused. For someone else? For whoever arrives carrying more than they planned to. The answer lingered gently between them. Neither hurried to explain it. Sometimes wisdom enters conversation wearing everyday clothes. The old man finally turned. His face carried wrinkles earned honestly through years of laughter and grief alike. "You look tired." "I slept." "I wasn't talking about sleep." Silence settled comfortably. Not awkward. Not demanding. Simply present. After a while, your soulmate admitted something they had not spoken aloud in months. "I'm afraid of becoming someone people have to fix." The old man nodded as though he'd heard the sentence many times before. "Most loving people aren't afraid of helping," he replied softly. "They're afraid of never being trusted enough to help." The words landed gently. Not as judgment. As invitation. Still, your soulmate said nothing more. Some walls do not crumble because someone knocks. They soften because someone waits. When they returned home that evening, they found your latest message waiting on their phone. Nothing dramatic. Just a simple question asking whether they had remembered to eat. A smile appeared before they could stop it. Such an ordinary question. Yet it carried something extraordinary. It noticed them. Not their accomplishments. Not their strengths. Them. For a long moment, they stared at the blinking cursor while deciding how much truth could fit inside one reply. "I did." They sent it. Then almost confessed everything. Their thumb hovered over the keyboard. Another sentence appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Deleted once more. How do you explain years of silent fear in a text message? You don't. Instead, you ask how the other person's day went. You add a smiling emoji. You promise everything is okay. And afterward, you sit in the quiet wondering why honesty feels heavier than loneliness. Night settled gently across the room. The rain returned. This time stronger. Drops tapped against the window with patient rhythm, as though reminding every hidden thought that no season remains unchanged forever. Unable to sleep, your soulmate wandered toward the bookshelf. Their hand hesitated before reaching for the wooden box. Dust gathered across their fingertips. The lid opened with a faint creak. Inside, every object remained exactly where memory had left it. The old movie ticket. The pressed flower. The worn key. And the unopened letter. They picked it up carefully. The paper had yellowed at the edges. Your name was nowhere on it. Neither was theirs. Only 3 handwritten words rested across the front. When you're ready. No date. No explanation. Just those words. For years they had believed the envelope belonged to another chapter of life. Another version of themselves. Tonight, for the first time, they wondered whether it had been waiting not for the past, but for the moment someone finally loved them enough that keeping one painful truth hidden no longer felt possible. Their fingers slipped beneath the edge of the seal. Then they stopped. Because deep inside, another realization had quietly arrived. The letter was not the secret they feared. It was only the door leading toward it. For a long while, the envelope rested between trembling hands without moving another inch. Outside, the rain continued its quiet conversation with the windowpane, each drop finding its own path before disappearing into another. Inside the room, time seemed unwilling to move at all. Your soulmate closed their eyes. Some people think courage is found in the moment someone finally speaks. Often, courage begins much earlier. It begins when someone admits they are no longer strong enough to keep pretending. The unopened letter was not frightening because of what it might contain. It was frightening because it might explain feelings they had spent years trying to rename. Loneliness had been called independence. Fear had been called caution. Heartbreak had been called maturity. The mind is remarkably creative when it believes the truth will hurt too much. A soft knock interrupted the silence. Not at the front door. At the apartment next door. Someone had forgotten their keys again. A familiar laugh drifted through the hallway, followed by another voice teasing them with gentle affection before the door finally opened. Life continued around them. Neighbors laughed. An elevator hummed somewhere below. A dog barked once before settling back into sleep. It was almost comforting to realize the world never stopped simply because one heart stood at the edge of an important decision. Your soulmate placed the envelope back inside the wooden box. Not yet. There was one place they felt drawn to before reading it. The feeling made little sense. Still, not every meaningful step begins with understanding. The next morning arrived wrapped in pale sunlight. The rain had washed the streets clean, leaving tiny puddles that reflected the sky like scattered pieces of glass. Without thinking too much about it, they drove toward the oldest neighborhood in town. It had changed over the years. Fresh paint covered houses that once looked forgotten. Children's bicycles rested in driveways where rusted cars had once stood. The bakery on the corner still smelled exactly the same. Warm bread. Cinnamon. Butter. Some memories fade. Others wait patiently inside familiar scents. Your soulmate stopped outside a small park surrounded by towering oak trees. The benches had been replaced. The playground had grown brighter. Only one thing remained exactly as it had always been. An enormous tree stood quietly near the center, its branches stretching across the morning sky as though embracing everyone who walked beneath it. As a teenager, this had been their refuge. Whenever life became louder than their thoughts, they came here. Sometimes they cried. Sometimes they laughed at themselves for crying. Sometimes they simply watched leaves dance in the wind until breathing felt easier again. They approached slowly. One hand rested against the rough bark. The tree had grown wider. So had the years between then and now. They smiled. It's still here. No one answered. None was needed. Certain places remember us even when they cannot speak. A breeze stirred the leaves overhead. One drifted down and landed gently against their shoulder before falling to the ground. For reasons they couldn't explain, tears gathered unexpectedly. Not dramatic tears. Not the kind that burst forward. The quiet kind. The kind that appear when your heart suddenly realizes it has finally returned somewhere safe. Nearby, a young girl chased bright yellow butterflies across the grass while her father watched from a distance. She stumbled. Before fear could become panic, she looked back. Her father smiled. "I'm right here." She stood again. Ran even faster. The scene lasted only seconds. Yet it lingered. Trust does something extraordinary. It does not remove the possibility of falling. It gives someone the confidence to stand again. Your soulmate whispered something almost too quietly to hear. I wish I believed that. The word surprised even them. How many years had they spent believing love could disappear the moment someone became too difficult? Too emotional. Too broken. Too honest. Those fears had not appeared without reason. Long before your story together began, there had been another chapter. Not defined by cruelty. Defined by misunderstanding. There had once been someone who admired their kindness but grew uncomfortable whenever sadness entered the room. Whenever difficult conversations appeared, silence followed. Whenever reassurance was needed, distance answered first. Little by little, your soulmate learned an invisible lesson. Keep the beautiful parts visible. Hide everything else. It seemed safer. Until safety slowly became isolation. The relationship eventually ended, but the habit remained. The habit survived longer than the heartbreak itself. That is often how healing works. Pain leaves. Protection stays. Sometimes far longer than necessary. The afternoon sun warmed the park as they found the old bench where countless afternoons had quietly disappeared years ago. Someone had carved initials into the wood. Fresh ones. Different people. Different promises. Life has a beautiful habit of continuing. As they sat down, they noticed something tucked beneath one corner of the bench. A folded piece of paper. Probably forgotten. Probably meaningless. Still, curiosity invited them closer. They unfolded it. Inside was a child's drawing. Two people holding hands beneath a crooked rainbow. Above them, written in uneven letters, were 4 simple words. You came back anyway. No name. No explanation. Perhaps it belonged to someone searching for it. Perhaps it had simply blown there with the wind. Yet something about those words settled gently inside their chest. You came back anyway. How many times had love quietly done exactly that? After difficult conversations. After misunderstandings. After moments of doubt. You had returned. Not perfectly. Not dramatically. Simply consistently. Checking whether they had eaten. Remembering stories they'd almost forgotten telling. Laughing at jokes that weren't particularly good. Waiting without demanding answers. They suddenly realized something almost embarrassing. You had never asked them to become someone easier to love. They had only imagined that expectation. The discovery brought comfort. And fear. Because if your love had truly been patient all along, then what reason remained for hiding? The question followed them home. Evening painted golden light across the living room floor. Dust floated lazily through the sunlight. The wooden box waited exactly where they had left it. This time they did not hesitate. The lid opened. The envelope returned to their hands. Slowly. Very slowly. They broke the seal. Inside rested only a single sheet of folded paper. Far thinner than expected. Almost disappointingly ordinary. They unfolded it. The handwriting belonged to someone older. Steadier. The ink had faded slightly with time. The first sentence stole the air from the room. If you are reading this, then perhaps you have finally met someone worth telling the whole truth. Their heartbeat quickened. They continued. Not someone perfect. Someone safe. Tears blurred the next lines before they could finish them. They blinked carefully. The words became clear once more. You have always believed that people leave because they discover who you really are. But that was never your deepest wound. Your deepest wound was believing you had to hide before anyone had the chance to choose differently. The room became impossibly still. Every memory seemed to rearrange itself. Every relationship. Every hesitation. Every smile that had arrived just a little too late. The letter continued. When you finally meet someone whose kindness remains even after they see your fears, do not make them spend years loving only half of your heart. Give them the chance to love all of it. A tear slipped silently onto the paper. Then another. Your soulmate laughed softly through those tears. Not because anything felt funny. Because the truth sometimes arrives so gently that resisting it suddenly feels exhausting. The letter was unsigned. There was no farewell. Only one final sentence waiting at the bottom of the page. The hardest confession will not be about what happened to you. It will be about what you have believed about yourself ever since. They lowered the page. The room felt different. Not changed. Uncovered. As evening settled into night, they reached for their phone. Your conversation remained open. Your last message still rested there, simple and warm. Their fingers hovered over the keyboard. This time they didn't type, "I'm fine." Instead, they wrote something they had never allowed themselves to say before. Can we talk tomorrow? There's something I've been carrying for a long time, and I don't think I want to carry it alone anymore. They stared at the words. Their thumb hesitated only once. Then they pressed send. The message disappeared. A small circle appeared on the screen. Waiting to be delivered. In that tiny moment between sending and receiving, another memory surfaced without warning. It wasn't from the relationship that had hurt them. It wasn't from childhood. It came from the very first day they met you. A detail they had almost forgotten. You had looked at them for a long second before smiling and saying, almost absent-mindedly, "You smile like someone who's apologizing for taking up space." At the time, they had laughed it off. Tonight, for the first time, they realized you had seen the painful truth long before they had ever found the courage to speak it aloud. The screen remained silent. Not for long. Only for a handful of seconds. Yet those few seconds stretched across your soulmate's thoughts with surprising weight. There is a unique kind of waiting that follows honesty. It is different from ordinary waiting. It is the moment after someone places a fragile piece of their heart into another person's hands and wonders whether it will be understood or quietly set aside. The message showed as delivered. Nothing more. Your soulmate set the phone face down on the table. For once, they did not want to measure love by how quickly someone replied. They wanted to believe something gentler, that real care sometimes takes a moment to find the right words. The room had grown darker. Only the small lamp beside the couch filled the apartment with warm amber light. Its glow reached the wooden box that still sat open. The letter remained unfolded beside it, no longer hidden, no longer waiting. How strange it was that a single page of paper could make an entire lifetime look different. They walked toward the kitchen almost without thinking. The kettle began to hum softly. Water always seemed to know exactly what to do when placed over steady heat. It didn't rush. It transformed. Perhaps hearts learned in much the same way. Steam curled upward as they poured tea into their favorite ceramic mug, the one with the tiny crack near the handle that never quite spread any farther. Most people would have replaced it years ago. Instead, they kept using it. Not because it was perfect. Because it was familiar. Because some things become more precious after surviving what should have broken them. Only tonight did they notice the quiet lesson resting in their own hands. Across town, your phone vibrated. You glanced at the message while folding laundry that had sat untouched on a chair for nearly 2 days. A single sentence. No explanation. No dramatic confession. Just a request. Can we talk tomorrow? Most people might have wondered what had happened. You wondered something else. How long had they been trying to ask? Without realizing it, you remembered dozens of tiny moments that suddenly fit together. The way they changed the subject whenever conversations became too personal. How they apologized for things that required no apology. How they always asked whether everyone else was comfortable before admitting they were cold. How they smiled first. And sighed later. Pieces that once looked unrelated quietly arranged themselves into a picture. You typed a reply. Then erased it. Not because you didn't care. Because you cared enough to answer carefully. Finally, you wrote only 4 words. I'm here. Take your time. No pressure. No questions. No assumptions. Just space. Sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to force someone to speak before they are ready. Your soulmate read those words several minutes later. Their shoulders relaxed before they even realized they had been tense. Such a simple message. Yet it asked for nothing. It demanded nothing. It quietly offered something they had rarely experienced. Permission. Permission to arrive exactly as they were. Not polished. Not cheerful. Not finished. That night, sleep came slowly. Dreams arrived in scattered pieces. An old hallway. A blue sweater hanging beside a front door. Rain tapping against a bedroom window. The enormous oak tree. The unopened letter. Only now, the letter was already open. And someone was standing beside them. Not speaking. Simply waiting. When morning finally arrived, sunlight spilled across the room in long golden lines. The world looked almost ordinary again. Almost. Yet something inside had shifted. Truth has a way of changing ordinary mornings without changing anything outside the window. They opened the curtains. Birds moved between branches. A delivery truck stopped across the street. Someone hurried toward work carrying breakfast in one hand and coffee in the other. Life continued exactly as yesterday. Only your soulmate no longer felt quite the same within it. They found themselves cleaning the apartment. Not because it was especially messy. Because hands sometimes need something gentle to do while the heart prepares itself. Books returned to shelves. Blankets were folded. A forgotten scarf disappeared into a closet. Then they reached the small drawer beside the television. Inside rested an old photograph. The edges had curled with age. For years they had avoided looking at it. Today they finally did. It showed 3 people. A younger version of your soulmate stood between 2 smiling adults. The smiles looked genuine. At first glance, it seemed like a perfectly happy family photograph. But photographs never capture silence. They never record conversations that happened afterward. They never reveal words someone carried for decades. Their thumb brushed gently across one familiar face. I finally understand. The whisper escaped almost without permission. Growing older does something unexpected. Sometimes it doesn't answer old questions. Sometimes it changes them entirely. For years they had believed their greatest wound came from being abandoned. The letter had uncovered something deeper. The fear had never been abandonment. It had been rejection after being fully known. That fear quietly shaped every relationship that followed. Not by shouting. By whispering. Don't tell them that part. Hide this memory. Smile here. Change the subject now. Apologize before they become disappointed. It had become such an automatic habit that it no longer felt like fear. It felt like personality. Until now. A soft knock echoed at the apartment door. Not loud. Just enough to interrupt their thoughts. They weren't expecting anyone. Curiosity replaced hesitation. When they opened the door, no one stood there. Only a small paper bag rested neatly on the welcome mat. Inside was a loaf of fresh bread from the neighborhood bakery. Still warm. Alongside it sat a handwritten note. The handwriting was unmistakably yours. I remembered you once said fresh bread always makes a place feel like home. Thought today might be a good day for that. Nothing else. No mention of the message. No hidden questions. No attempt to hurry the conversation. Just bread. Still warm. Your soulmate stood in the doorway longer than necessary. Their eyes filled again. Not because of the gift itself. Because you had remembered something they had mentioned almost a year ago during an ordinary Saturday afternoon. They had forgotten saying it. You hadn't. Love often hides inside memory. Not memory of anniversaries. Memory of small things everyone else overlooks. The scent of warm bread filled the apartment. It mingled with sunlight and fresh tea until the entire room felt different. Safer. For the first time in many years, your soulmate whispered something they had never believed before. Maybe home isn't a place. The sentence lingered unfinished. Then another thought completed it. Maybe it's a person who keeps making room for your whole heart. The realization was beautiful. It was also terrifying. Because if that were true, then there could be no more hiding. No more carefully edited stories. No more pretending old wounds had never existed. The conversation waiting for later that day would ask for something far greater than words. It would ask for trust. And deep inside, another memory, one they had buried so completely they believed it was gone forever, began slowly rising toward the surface. This was not a memory of heartbreak. Nor of loss. It was older than both. It was the moment everything had begun. The moment a single sentence spoken by someone they loved as a child quietly taught them that being honest about their pain might cost them the love they needed most. And as that forgotten voice returned, clear enough to hear once again, your soulmate realized the painful truth they had been hiding from you had never truly been about you at all. It had started many years before the two of you ever met. That I can definitely continue the story from where it left off. One note, though, your original prompt required that the narration begin with, "My beloved child." Since we're now continuing part 4 from the middle, I won't repeat that phrase, and I'll pick up directly from the last line. The memory did not arrive all at once. It surfaced the way dawn slowly reaches a room, revealing one familiar shape after another until what was once hidden can no longer pretend to be darkness. Your soulmate remained standing in the quiet apartment, one hand still resting against the kitchen counter, the scent of fresh bread lingering in the air. Outside, someone laughed as they walked past the building. A bicycle rolled over the damp pavement. Somewhere below, a delivery driver whistled an old tune that seemed to belong to another decade. Life had a gentle way of continuing, even when someone's past finally decided it was ready to be remembered. The forgotten voice belonged to an afternoon many years earlier. They had been no older than 10. The living room had felt unusually small that day. Heavy curtains kept most of the sunlight outside, leaving only narrow ribbons of light stretching across the wooden floor. A clock ticked patiently on the wall. Every second sounded louder than the one before it. They remembered standing in the doorway, clutching the sleeve of an oversized sweater, trying to gather enough courage to say what had happened at school. Someone had been cruel. Not in a dramatic way. Just enough to leave invisible bruises that children rarely know how to explain. They had finally whispered, "Today was hard." The adult they trusted most looked up only briefly before returning to the stack of unpaid bills spread across the table. "We all have hard days." The words were not spoken with anger. They were spoken with exhaustion. But exhausted words can still leave lasting echoes. Your soulmate had nodded. "I know. I just..." The sentence never found its ending. The response came gently, almost absent-mindedly. "You're the strong one. Don't worry me unless it's really serious." The conversation lasted less than a minute. The lesson lasted decades. Without realizing it, a child quietly made a promise. "If my pain makes someone else's day heavier, I'll carry it myself." Children often confuse adaptation with identity. They do what helps them survive. Then they spend years believing that survival is simply who they are. That single afternoon had never been revisited. No one apologized because no one knew a wound had been created. No one intended to teach silence. Yet silence had become fluent. It explained why every difficult feeling was translated into, "I'm okay." It explained why every compliment was met with disbelief. It explained why accepting care always felt more uncomfortable than offering it. The realization settled over them with surprising gentleness. There was no anger toward the past. Only understanding. Understanding often arrives carrying compassion instead of blame. The phone buzzed softly. "A message from you." "No rush. I'm leaving work early. We can walk if you'd rather not sit somewhere." A walk. No restaurant. No crowded cafe. No formal conversation across a table. Just walking. Side by side. Looking forward instead of directly at each other. It felt like exactly the kind of kindness someone offers when they understand that difficult truths sometimes need movement before they can become words. By late afternoon, the sky had turned a pale blue brushed with slow-moving clouds. You were already waiting near the entrance of the riverside path, hands tucked into your jacket pockets. When your soulmate approached, your smile arrived exactly as it always did. Warm. Unforced. Half a second late, as though happiness always took one extra heartbeat to become visible. Neither of you spoke immediately. There was no need. The path stretched ahead beneath rows of old trees whose branches swayed gently above the water. Leaves drifted across the surface of the river, disappearing beneath the bridge before either of you could follow them with your eyes. After several quiet minutes, you glanced toward them. "I've missed walking with you." Such a simple sentence. No hidden meaning. No invitation to confess. Just honesty. "I've missed it too," they answered. Their voice sounded steadier than they expected. You continued walking. Occasionally pointing toward a family of ducks near the shoreline. Laughing when one particularly determined squirrel tried to drag an acorn nearly twice its size across the path. Talking about ordinary things. A neighbor who had adopted an elderly dog. The bakery that had started making blackberry pies again. A book you thought they would enjoy. The conversation wandered gently through everyday life. And somehow, that made the difficult words easier to approach. Eventually, your soulmate stopped beside the old wooden railing overlooking the river. The current moved slowly beneath it. Always moving. Never rushing. "I need to tell you something." You turned toward them. Not anxiously. Not impatiently. Simply present. "I know." The answer surprised them. "You know?" "I know you've been carrying something." You smiled softly. "I just don't know what it is." Silence rested between you. Not empty. Safe. Your soulmate looked toward the water. I've spent most of my life believing that if people saw every part of me, their voice caught, they would eventually decide I was too much work. You didn't interrupt. So I learned to become the easiest person to love. Another pause. I became good at listening. They gave a faint smile. Good at remembering birthdays. Good at showing up for everyone. Their eyes filled. And terrible at letting anyone show up for me. The wind lifted a few loose strands of hair across their face. For the first time, they didn't brush the tears away before you could see them. I wasn't hiding something you did. They looked at you fully now. I was hiding someone I believed I had to be. The words hung in the evening air. You stepped closer. Not enough to erase the space between you. Only enough that they no longer felt alone inside it. Then you said something so quiet they almost missed it. I've never wanted the version of you that never struggles. A tear escaped despite every attempt to stop it. I've wanted the real one. No speeches followed. No dramatic embrace. Only a long silence filled with the kind of understanding that cannot be improved by additional words. The river continued flowing. The breeze continued moving through the trees. Somewhere behind you, a child laughed as bubbles floated into the evening light. For the first time in years, your soulmate felt something loosen inside them. Not every knot. Just the first one. Sometimes healing begins with only that. One knot. One truth. One person who stays. Yet even as relief settled gently over the moment, another realization quietly formed in the back of your soulmate's mind. The painful truth they had finally spoken was only part of the story. There was still one name they had never mentioned. One person connected to the old letter. One conversation that had never happened. And deep inside their coat pocket, folded carefully beside their hand, rested a second piece of paper they had discovered hidden beneath the first inside the wooden box. A page they had been too afraid to unfold. Until now.